Here are some quick runners that you can make with scraps or new yardage. It's easy to change it up to tailor to your taste or to the fabric you have on hand. The best part of this pattern, there aren't any seams that need matching. In this video, you'll learn about a few different ways to put this runner together. Hope you decide to stay tuned. I've given the yardage for these two runners, but you can usually adapt this to fit what you have on hand. You'll find a supply list in the directions below, or you can visit learnhowtoquilt.com and click on patterns and then table runners. First, I'll show you how to put together this table mat or table topper using two different fabrics. This is the quickest way to construct a runner with this up and down strip pattern. Using strip piecing, it goes together fast. Cut one 3-inch by 45-inch strip, and then one 4-inch strip from the background fabric. Cut one 8-inch strip from the main fabric. Sew these 3 strips together using 1/4-inch seam allowances. If you're new to quilting, this is a good time to practice sewing that accurate 1/4-inch seam. After stitching, you want to press towards the dark. For tips on sewing accurately, you can check out the links below. We have a number of videos at our website on this topic. Line up this edge with one of the lines on your mat. Trim off the end, and then cut every 2.5 inches. When all the strips have been cut, you want to lay them out. Start with one going in this direction. The next one, you want to turn and have it going in the opposite direction, making sure to line up these edges. The next one stays as is, and then turn, and then continue till you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sections laid out. Right now, this might look too long, but when you start stitching these seams together, it's going to get much smaller. Put right sides together. You can pin this or just take it over to the sewing machine and line it up. I'll press this later after everything's been sewn together. So I'll take and put right sides together, line up the top, take this over to the machine, and then stitch. I sewed all the sections together, and as promised, there were no matching seams here, so it goes together pretty quickly. And then I pressed all these seams in one direction, just because I think it's easier to do that. Trim the sides to get nice clean edges. You can use the extra strips to make another placemat, or you can use them to make a longer table runner. Cut the backing and the batting a little bit larger than the top. I'm planning on machine stitching this in the ditch here. I pin about every 2 to 3 inches apart and avoid these vertical lines. Later in this video, you'll get more information about quilting by machine. You can also check out the links below for more details. Add the binding, and here's the completed project. This runner takes longer to complete as you sew each row individually instead of using the strip piecing method. The trade-off is that you get to use up different scraps for the center. You also don't have to line up every other rectangle. This is a little more free-form. I cut 3.5 by 10-inch strips, but you can use any size rectangle for this. There are 12 of these in this Halloween runner, but once again, you can add more or less depending on the size you want to end up with. Lay out your rectangles and take a picture so you can refer back to it. For the background, I used 2 fabrics close in color and value, but you can use a lot of different backgrounds like I did on this I Spy placemat. I cut a total of 5 3.5-inch by 45-inch strips, and then I cut these into sections varying from 4 to 6 inches long. These were added to the ends of the orange rectangles. Don't worry that the edges aren't lining up. You'll trim these later after everything's been sewn together. For me, this is much easier than figuring out the cutting sizes for those background pieces. Decide if you want to cut strips for the top and bottom. This is a Scrappy runner, so you get to decide if you want to make it longer. Plus, you can decide if you want to make it the same width as the other strips. Mine are about 2.5 inches wide. I sewed the strips in each row and then pressed to the dark. Then I picked up 2 rows and sewed them together. I could start trimming the ends at this point, but I wanted to wait till everything was sewn together. After everything's been sewn together, I'm ready to trim the sides. Sometimes I like to use what I call plumb lines to check and see if I've got everything centered. These are just scraps of leftover binding that I hang from the top. This is about where I'll be cutting on either side. It's not an exact measurement, but it just gives me a chance to look at this runner and decide if I want to cut more off on the right or more off on the left. And actually, I think this is okay. So I make a mark at the top and at the bottom to sort of give me guidance when I go to cut. Doesn't have to be perfect. It just gives me a good idea about where I need to cut. To trim this excess, I like to fold this in half. Then I like to line the edges up on my cutting board. Now, I'm not sure if you can see it, but here's my mark. I'm going to line that mark up with the line on my cutting board. Make sure this is nice and flat. I'll line my ruler up with this line, and then I'll cut. Before I cut the other side, I like to open this up and just double check to see if that's where I want that. Let's see. So here's this line, and I might want to bring it in just a little. I'll fold this in half. Here's my mark. I'll line it up on this line. Make sure everything's nice and flat, and then I'll cut. To make the quilt sandwich, make sure that your backing and your top have been pressed. I like to tape my backing down to a table. Now, this is an old table, and I don't care that this gets scratched. If you have a newer table, you'll want to put cardboard in between. Then I've layered the batting and the top over the backing. Usually I have a little extra batting on the outside edge, maybe up to 1 inch, because once you start quilting, sometimes this batting gets sort of sucked up into the inside. So I usually like a little extra here, but since this is a small piece and I'm not going to do a whole lot of quilting, I think I could get by. Also, this is a leftover scrap that I had that just fits this almost perfectly. So I thought, well, let's try out and see. I did notice that over here, this is almost right up against the edge of the fabric. And so here's a little trick if you have cotton batting. You can sort of put your hand in and pull that batting a little to stretch it out. Now I'm ready to pin. I plan on stitching in the ditch to quilt this, so I want to make sure that my pins are not on these seam lines. Start in the center and then pin about every maybe 3 inches. When you pin, you want to push all the way down into that backing fabric and then come up and latch that. There's all kinds of devices that you can purchase to help with snapping these pins shut, but I find just doing it by hand works best for me. Although I will say I do have to take a rest sometimes because my fingers start hurting. One of the things you can purchase are these safety pins that are a little crooked, and it makes it a little bit easier to get that to shut. So I work my way out from the middle and pin everything. After everything's been pinned, I'm ready to take this to the sewing machine. I'll be stitching in the ditch just on these vertical lines. Normally I'd be quilting this with a walking foot, But since this is so small and has very little quilting, I'm just going to use a regular foot. I usually set my stitch length a little bit longer. When I'm stitching, I'll just be stitching in this seam line here. Now, because of the way I pressed, this is what I call valley, and this is a hill, and there's a ridge right between the two. I want my needle to come down right alongside of that ridge, going into this fabric here, or the valley. I use my hands as sort of an embroidery hoop, and I've got this inside rolled up here to make it a little bit easier to move this bulk through. When I stop to readjust my hands, I want to make sure that that needle's in the down position. I have a button on my machine that can ensure it's always down, or you can just take and turn the wheel on your sewing machine so that it's down. I don't know if you can notice, but this is puckering a little. If I'd have my walking foot on, you wouldn't get that. So let's see. I'm gonna see if I can adjust that a little. Spread that out. If a pin's in the way, just unpin it. So let me bring this down. So let's turn this over and look at the back. And I'm not getting any puckers back there, so I think using my regular foot's going to be okay. When I finish all of my stitching in the ditch, I like to go around the edge about 1/8 of an inch and stitch that down. It helps when I go to trim it. After everything's been quilted, I like to trim up the sides. Now I'm ready to add this binding. I like to start about maybe 10 or 12 inches from the corner, and I'll pin this in place and I'll start stitching about here into the corner and then go all the way around. If you'd like more information about adding binding, you can check out our binding series at learnhowtoquilt.com. I'll leave the link below. I stitched the binding to the back, and here's my table runner. I get double mileage out of these, as I use Halloween prints on the one side and a more formal fabric on the other side. That's good for any occasion. I hope you get a chance to try one of these runners. As I said earlier, you can easily adapt them to the fabric you have on hand. This one was made from I Spy scraps. Some of these strips are different widths. This runner, made from 2 fabrics, features strips of many different sizes. I couldn't find a scrap of batting for the middle, so I just added the backing. I put right sides together and stitched, making sure to leave a space open for turning. I also rounded off the corners. Thanks for visiting our channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and it would sure help this channel. If you have any questions or concerns, please comment below or send me an email at ann@learnhowtoquilt.com. Thanks.